Rain came down hard over Seattle that night, the slow autumn kind that turned every street lamp into a bruised halo. Enoch Caldwell pulled his collar tighter as he stepped out of the side service door of the boutique hotel where he had just finished a 12-hour shift. He was 29 years old, a single father, an operations manager. On any other Tuesday, he would have walked straight to the parking garage and driven his daughter home. But Louisa stopped under the awning. She was 7, small for her age, hugging her backpack the way other children hugged stuffed animals. Inside that backpack was a worn paperback her mother had read aloud to her every night for the first 5 years of her life. Enoch followed his daughter's gaze across the wet sidewalk to the corner of the building, where a young woman sat huddled against the brick, soaked through, shivering, holding a bundle wrapped in a torn plastic bag against her chest as though it were a child. "Daddy," Louisa whispered. "She looks like Mommy when Mommy was sad." That was when Enoch's whole night changed, though he did not know it yet. He did not know that the woman on the wet pavement had once stood on a stage in front of 300 people and been called the future of children's literacy in the Pacific Northwest. He did not know that her name had been quietly erased from the front page of the very organization she had founded. He only knew that his daughter had stopped and that the security guard was already moving toward the woman with the flat, professional impatience that pretended to be politeness. He had been the operations manager for almost 4 years. He was good at his job because he was steady, and he was steady because he did not have a choice anymore. 2 years earlier, his wife had died after a long illness. She had been a high school librarian, a soft-voiced woman with chestnut hair who had read bedtime stories to Louisa in 3 different voices. After the funeral, something had shifted. The little girl now treated her reading homework like a wound. She would stare at the page, lips moving slightly, and then close the book and look out the window with the expression of someone trying not to cry. Her teacher had warned him 3 times that fall. Comprehension was slipping. The gap was widening. Enoch always nodded, and on the drive home he gripped the wheel a little tighter because he understood the truth nobody had said out loud. His daughter was not slow. She was simply afraid that opening a book meant hearing her mother's voice again. That Tuesday night, Louisa stopped on the wet sidewalk and pointed. The woman against the brick wall could not have been more than 28. Her dark hair was plastered to her cheek, her lips were faintly blue, and she was wearing a thin V-neck dress that had once been black and was now the color of wet stone. Over it she wore a bleached raincoat. One of her low heels had snapped at the spine. A small wheeled suitcase, also broken, sat beside her like a tired animal. None of that was what caught Louisa's attention. What caught her attention was the bundle the woman was protecting. Even in the rain, the woman kept her body curled around it, sheltering it from the worst of the water. It was a book. The hotel security guard reached her first. He told her she could not stay there, that there were facilities for people like her on 3rd Avenue. A wealthy guest stepped past Enoch then, an older man in a long coat, and said in a voice low enough to feel like advice but loud enough to carry, "Don't get involved, son. You help one, you'll have 10 on your doorstep tomorrow." Enoch was tired. He had learned, in the way most working parents learn, to choose his battles and let the rest of the city's injustices roll past him like the rain. He almost did the same thing now. Then Louisa tugged his sleeve and said, "Daddy, if she doesn't have a house, why is she still keeping the book?" He looked down at his daughter. He looked at the woman against the wall. He looked, finally, at the book wrapped in torn plastic, and he understood that his 7-year-old had asked the only question that mattered. He stepped forward. The woman flinched, which told him she had been moved along by a lot of strangers already. He kept his hands visible, kept his voice low, told her his name and that he worked at the hotel. He simply asked if she would come inside long enough to dry off. She looked up at him with eyes that had once been used to boardrooms, and what struck Enoch was that her first reaction was not gratitude. It was caution. She told him, with the diction of someone who had once given speeches, that she did not want money, did not want trouble, and would move along when the rain eased. Her voice was hoarse from the cold, but her grammar was perfect. Louisa, watching, slipped her own paperback out of her backpack and held it up. The woman blinked. Then, almost without thinking, she said the author's full name, and added, softly, "The boy in that book isn't really angry at the world, you know. He's only afraid of being left behind." She said it the way a teacher says it, and Louisa stared at her like she had just been handed a key to a locked door. Enoch made his decision then. He did not bring the woman home. He was a father before anything else. Instead, he walked back into the hotel, used his employee discount and his own credit card to book the smallest single room available for one night, and asked the head of housekeeping to bring up a hot meal, dry clothes from the lost and found, basic toiletries, and a kettle of tea. He logged the transaction clearly under his own name on the internal record, so no one could later accuse him of misusing hotel resources. When he led the woman to the elevator, she asked him, very quietly, why he was helping her when he did not know who she was. He glanced at Louisa, who was holding his hand, and answered, "Because my daughter is watching. And I don't want her to grow up thinking the lesson is to step over people who are cold." The woman did not cry, exactly. But for the first time her shoulders loosened, just slightly, and she nodded once, like a person accepting a debt she intended to repay. Her name, she said when she finally said it, was Callista Bennett. That night, alone in the small hotel room, Callista sat on the edge of the bed with her sopping suitcase open on the carpet. Inside were a few damp papers, a creased manila envelope, and a single photograph. The photograph showed a younger version of her standing on a stage under a spotlight. Beneath her shoes, in the frame of the picture, the words ran in a curving banner, "Founder and Chief Executive Officer, Bennett Reading House." She held the photograph against her knee for a long time before she put it away. The next morning, Enoch expected Callista to be gone. Instead, she was in the lobby at 6:15, hair-brushed, wearing a borrowed cardigan over the same dress. She returned the room key herself. She thanked the front desk attendant by name. Enoch had brought Louisa with him for the early drop-off. Louisa would sit at a small back table in the lobby and try to do her reading homework in the quiet hour before school. That morning, the assignment was a short story about a boy who refused to speak to his older sister for 3 days. Louisa was supposed to answer 4 questions about how the boy felt. She had been staring at the first question for 10 minutes. Callista watched from across the lobby. She watched the way Louisa's eyes skated past the page and away, the way the little girl's breath caught when she reached a sentence containing the word, "remember." Then Callista crossed the room, sat down 2 chairs away from the child, and said, very simply, "You're not slow, you're just reading with your fear." Louisa looked up. Enoch turned around. It was the first time anyone had said the actual problem out loud. Enoch asked Callista if she had been a teacher. She looked at the carpet for a moment before answering. "I taught children's literature once," she said, "and I worked in education." She did not elaborate, and he did not press. Instead, he made her an offer. He would pay her by the hour, in cash, for 2 sessions a week, held at the public library 3 blocks away. He would always be present in the building. The arrangement would be transparent and bounded. Callista refused at first. She told him her past was complicated and that he should not bring his daughter near someone like her. He looked at her steadily and said, "I'm not hiring your past. I'm hiring the way you just looked at my daughter." She agreed to 1 session. The first session was on a Thursday at the library. Callista did not ask Louisa to read aloud. She did not put a stopwatch on the page. She placed the assigned story open in front of them and asked 3 questions. What does this character want? What is this character afraid of? What is this character hiding? Louisa thought hard, twisted her sleeves, and then answered, slowly. She got every question right. By the end of the hour, she was the one turning the page. Enoch watched from the next aisle. He saw something he had not seen in his daughter's face for 2 years. It was concentration without panic. When the session ended, Callista quietly handed Enoch a folded sheet of notebook paper. On it she had sketched a simple color-coded map of how to teach a hurting child to read again. It was the work of someone who had not improvised. It was the work of someone who had built curricula. That night, after Louisa was asleep, Enoch sat at his kitchen table with his laptop and typed her name into the search bar. The screen filled with 3-year-old headlines. Founder of children's literacy nonprofit accused of embezzlement. Bennett Reading House severs ties with founder. The numbers were the same in every story. $180,000 missing from a scholarship fund earmarked for low-income children in 3 counties. The articles said an internal investigation had identified Callista's electronic signature on the disbursement order. They said the new acting executive director, a man named Ronnie Mercer, was committed to restoring public trust. There was no criminal trial. There was no follow-up. There was a quiet, expensive smear, and then there was silence. The next afternoon, Enoch asked to speak with Callista in the small conference room off the library's main floor. He did not bring an accusation. He brought the printed articles, set them on the table between them and said, "Is there anything here I need to know to keep my daughter safe?" She looked at the printouts the way someone looks at an old wound. "Yes," she said finally. "You need to know I lost everything because I tried to save my brother." She told him then about Finn. Her younger brother had broken his back in a warehouse accident at 23 and had become dependent on the painkillers prescribed for 9 months. She had paid for his first rehabilitation program out of her own savings. She had paid for the second one too. She had been afraid that if her board found out, they would push her out of her own organization. She had confided in exactly one person at Bennett Reading House about Finn's struggles. That person had been the chief financial officer. His name was Ronnie Mercer. She told Enoch, looking him in the eye, "I made mistakes. I hid my brother's situation. I trusted the wrong man. But I did not steal money from children. I built that scholarship fund. I would never have touched it." Enoch did not promise her he believed her. He simply said he would not cancel the next session, and that whatever else was true about her, his daughter had read 3 pages without flinching for the first time in 2 years, and that mattered. When he got back to the hotel that evening, he saw a glossy banner being hung in the main ballroom. A black tie fundraising gala. The host organization was Bennett Reading House. The event chair, smiling in the photo, was Ronnie Mercer. Enoch stood in the empty corridor and felt something cold settle in his chest. Over the next 3 weeks, Louisa began to change in small, undeniable ways. She brought her mother's old paperback to the library one afternoon and set it on the table without saying anything. Callista did not push. "Instead," she said gently, "crying doesn't mean you're weak. Sometimes it just means your heart is recognizing that someone still matters." That sentence sat with Louisa for a long time. The next session, she opened her mother's book to a page she had not been able to finish for 2 years and read 3 sentences out loud, hesitating, then continuing. By the end of the second week, her teacher pulled Enoch aside and told him Louisa had answered a class discussion question so insightfully that it had startled the room. The question had been why a character refused to tell the truth. Louisa said, "Because some people are afraid that if they say the real thing, no one will love them anymore." Enoch had to step out into the school parking lot before he answered the teacher. A quieter thing was happening between Enoch and Callista. They did not become close in any rushed or romantic way. They became something rarer. 2 adults who had learned, separately and painfully, how easy it was to lose the person you had been. She never tried to step into the role of mother. She knew Louisa already had a mother, gone, and that no living woman should pretend otherwise. Enoch noticed that, and respected her more for it. One afternoon, when Louisa asked Callista why she still carried the rain-warped book around, Callista answered, "Because when you lose everything, you need one thing left that reminds you of who you were." Louisa, frowning a little, asked, "Who are you?" Callista looked out the window at the gray light. "Someone who is trying to remember," she said. That same week, Ronnie Mercer walked into the hotel for a venue inspection. He was dressed for the photograph he expected to take afterward. A charcoal suit, a navy tie, a careful smile. He spoke about literacy and second chances and stewardship. From the other end of the lobby, Callista saw him before he saw her, and her face went the color of paper. He saw her seconds later. He simply walked over, lowered his voice and said, "I thought you'd left this city by now." He asked the general manager for a brief private meeting with Enoch afterward. Enoch sat across from him in a small office while Ronnie expressed elegant, sympathetic concern. He had heard, he said, that one of the operations staff was associating with a woman who had a difficult financial history, a woman whose presence near a high-profile children's gala might create a real problem for the hotel, as well as for Bennett Reading House. He merely mentioned that his organization had several venue alternatives in the city, that contracts could be reviewed. Within an hour, Enoch was called upstairs. His regional director did not raise his voice. He reminded Enoch that the hotel valued personal kindness, but expected professional judgment, that single fathers needed stable employment and steady benefits. He did not say, "Stop helping her." He did not have to. Callista heard about all of it that evening. She told Enoch she would leave Seattle. She had already cost too many people too much, and she would not let his daughter's father lose his job because of her. She left a folded letter at the front desk for Louisa the next morning, then walked toward the bus station with her broken suitcase. Louisa came home from school that day and read the letter at the kitchen table. It was the first letter she had ever read from start to finish without putting it down. Her father watched her trace the lines with her finger, watched her lips move silently around the last sentence, which was, "Letters are places where the people who love you are still able to speak." Louisa read it twice. Then she looked up at Enoch with wet eyes and said, "She's leaving because of us, isn't she?" Enoch did not lie to his daughter. He told her the truth, and then he put on his coat. He found Callista at the bus station 40 minutes later, the bus to Spokane, scheduled to board in 20 minutes. He sat down beside her and said, "My daughter just read an entire letter without giving up. You don't get to disappear and turn that into a lesson that good people always have to leave." She told him quietly that he could lose his job. He told her he was not sure he could win against Ronnie Mercer either. But he was sure of one thing. He did not want Louisa growing up believing that a man's reputation mattered more than the truth. They walked back into the rain together. On the bench she had left behind a battered manila envelope. Inside were a few damp printed emails, an old event schedule, and the name of a former staff accountant from Bennett Reading House. The name was Bernice Clark. The next morning, Enoch took out a yellow legal pad and started building a timeline. He was not a hacker. He was not a forensic accountant. But he was an operations manager, and operations managers lived inside calendars and approval chains and missing minutes. He spread Callista's papers across the small table in the staff break room, and they went through them together, line by line. The disbursement order in question had been processed at 7:42 in the evening on a Thursday, in April 3 years earlier. The signature on the order was electronic and bore Callista's credentials, but Callista remembered that night with absolute clarity. At 7:42 that evening, she had been standing on a stage in front of more than 200 donors at the annual Reading House Scholarship Gala, delivering the keynote address. She had been on stage from 7:30 to 8:10 without leaving the platform. There had been a live stream that night. Most of it had been quietly removed from the organization's archive after the scandal. But video rarely dies cleanly. With Louisa's help, on a rainy Saturday afternoon, they hunted through old uploaded clips from parents who had attended the event. Eventually it was Louisa, leaning over the laptop with a juice box in her hand, who said, "Daddy, look at the clock." In the background of one parent's recording, mounted on the back wall of the gala hall, was an old-fashioned analog clock. At the moment, Callista stood at the microphone. The hands on the clock read 7:42. The three of them sat in silence around the laptop for a long minute. Bernice Clark was harder to find. She had left Bennett Reading House quietly, 2 months after Callista's removal, taken a smaller job at a bookkeeping office in a strip mall, and lived a careful, unremarkable life ever since. She refused 2 emails. She refused a phone call. Then Callista wrote a short handwritten note. The note did not accuse, demand, or beg. It said only that there was a child in Seattle who needed to know that the woman who had taught her to love books again was not a thief. Bernice met them at a coffee shop near the library, 2 days later. Her hands shook the entire time. She told them that during her last 6 weeks at the reading house she had begun building a private spreadsheet of unusual transactions, and that every single one of those transactions had passed through a secondary approval credential issued to one person. She had backed up the spreadsheet on a personal drive the night before she resigned. She had been too afraid to do anything with it for 3 years. She had told herself silence was survival. Callista did not raise her voice. She did not shame Bernice. She only said, "I wish you had been braver back then. But you can still do the right thing today." Bernice agreed to give the spreadsheet to a community attorney named Hilda Prescott. Hilda reviewed the materials, then warned them firmly that none of it could be released publicly first. It had to go to the board of directors and an independent auditor. To force the board to listen, however, they needed a moment with enough public weight to make the truth impossible to bury. The gala, 2 weeks away, was that moment. The day before the event, Ronnie Mercer made his last move. Enoch was called into the upstairs office at 9 in the morning. The regional director, who would not meet his eyes, told him he was being suspended with pay pending an internal review. He would not be working the gala. He would not be in the building. Enoch listened. He asked one question, in the steady voice of a man who had practiced not panicking. He asked whether the suspension would affect Louisa's medical insurance. It would not for now. He nodded once and walked out. He sat in his car in the parking garage for a long time before he started the engine. He thought about how easy it would be to stop. He thought about Louisa, asleep 2 miles away, who would never know what he chose tonight unless he chose it badly. That evening, while Louisa was eating macaroni at the kitchen table, she looked up and asked, "Daddy, are you sad because of Miss Bennett?" He set down his fork. He told her that sometimes adults had to choose between what was easy and what was right. "What if you choose the right thing and you still lose?" she asked. He looked at her for a long time. "Then at least," he said, "I won't have taught my own heart to be a coward." Callista, when she heard about the suspension, tried again to leave. He did not let her. He said he was not doing this only for her. He was doing it for Louisa, for the children whose names were still being used as a backdrop for Ronnie Mercer's photograph. Hilda finalized the affidavit. Bernice agreed to be present at the gala as a witness. Finn Bennett, still missing, had been sent a single message through a rehabilitation center where he had once been registered. They had no way of knowing whether he would receive it. Callista borrowed a deep navy dress with a modest V neckline. Hilda lent her shoes that fit. Her dark hair fell loose over her shoulders. When she looked at herself in the mirror that night, she did not see a chief executive. She saw a woman who had been buried, who was about to walk into the room of the people who had buried her, and who intended to carry her own coffin out by herself. "I'm not coming back to ask for my old life," she said very quietly, to her own reflection. "I'm coming to take back the truth." The ballroom of the boutique hotel had been transformed for the gala. The ceiling glittered. The Bennett Reading House logo glowed on a screen behind the stage. There were 200 guests in evening wear, donors, board members, education executives, 3 local reporters, and parents who had wired Callista and had spent 3 years trying to forget her. Ronnie Mercer stood near the stage, accepting handshakes. He spoke smoothly about literacy, second chances, every child's right to find themselves in a book. Several phrases in his prepared remarks were lifted, almost word for word, from speeches Callista had given 5 years earlier. Enoch was not on the staff list that night. He came in through the front door instead, in a gray suit that did not quite fit anymore, holding Louisa's hand. Hilda walked beside them, carrying a slim leather portfolio. Bernice trailed a few steps behind, her face pale. Callista entered last. The room did not go silent all at once. It went silent in waves, the way a sea draws back before something larger arrives. The donors closest to the door noticed her first. Then, the board members. Then, Ronnie Mercer. He recovered fast. He smiled into the microphone and said, with carefully modulated regret, that this was a children's event and not a stage for individuals with unfortunate financial histories seeking renewed attention. Callista did not raise her voice. She walked, slowly, to a position 3 steps below the stage, faced the room, and said, "I'm not here to ask for my chair back. I'm here to return the truth to the children you've been hiding behind." Hilda stepped forward then and asked the chair of the board, an older man named Mr. Whitford, for 10 minutes of the room's time. Ronnie objected. Mr. Whitford, who had quietly never been entirely comfortable with how the original investigation had been handled, agreed. Hilda laid out the evidence in 4 pieces. First, the disbursement order time-stamped at 7:42 on a Thursday evening in April. Second, a parent's recording that placed Callista on stage in front of 200 witnesses at that exact moment, with an analog clock visible on the back wall, reading 7:42 Agarau. Third, Bernice Clark's spreadsheet of irregular disbursements, every one of which had passed through a secondary approval credential belonging not to the executive director, but to the chief financial officer. Fourth, an internal email in which the chief financial officer instructed the records department to close several files before an outside audit could begin. Bernice took the microphone briefly, her voice unsteady but clear. She said she had stayed silent for 3 years because she had been afraid. She said she was sorry. She apologized to Callista directly, in front of the room. Ronnie Mercer's smile did not return. He told the room the documents were forgeries. He said Callista had manipulated everyone. He said, in a voice that stopped being smooth for the first time, that they should not trust the testimony of a woman who had been sleeping on the street. The room shifted at that sentence. People who had still been undecided turned, finally, against him. Using the very thing he had done to her as evidence of her unreliability turned out to be the moment his strategy revealed itself. Then, before any board member could respond, Louisa let go of her father's hand and walked to the bottom of the stage steps. Enoch reached for her. She shook her head once, gently. She climbed 2 steps, opened a small paperback, and in a clear, slightly trembling voice she read a paragraph her tutor had once taught her. It was a paragraph about a woman who had been misunderstood by an entire village, but who kept a single lamp burning in her front window, so that anyone who lost their way could still find their way home. Louisa stumbled on one word. She corrected herself and finished. Her father had to put a hand against the back of a chair. When she stepped down, the room was very quiet. Ronnie Mercer turned to leave. The ballroom doors opened. Finn Bennett walked in. He had lost weight. His coat was old. His face was the face of a man who had spent years rehearsing this moment, and almost never coming. He looked at his sister first. Then he turned to Ronnie Mercer. "You told me to disappear," he said. "I'm not going to let her take this from me anymore." Finn had not arrived by accident. Hilda's note had reached him through the rehabilitation program 6 days earlier. He had walked into a counselor's office that morning, with shaking hands, and asked, simply, whether someone could help him get to a hotel in Seattle that evening. He told the room what had happened. About the warehouse accident. About the painkillers. About how, 2 years before the scandal, Ronnie Mercer had cornered him and offered to discreetly cover the cost of his second rehabilitation stay through a private intermediary account. He told them how Ronnie had taught him, slowly, to receive small wires through that account. How Ronnie had said that this would protect Callista. How, when the scandal broke, Ronnie had told him to leave Seattle and never speak to his sister again. He had brought messages, voice recordings, and account statements he had had hidden inside an old jacket lining for 3 years. By the end of Finn's testimony, the board had no choice but to suspend Ronnie's access to all financial systems pending an independent audit. 2 security officers in quiet suits escorted Ronnie Mercer out of the ballroom. The room did not erupt. There was no cheering. Most people were too stunned, or too ashamed of how easily they had once believed the simpler story. Finally, Callista turned to her brother. Finn was crying. He told her he did not deserve forgiveness. She looked at him for a long moment. "You didn't ruin my life because you were in pain," she said. "You ruined it when you let me carry it alone." She did not embrace him. She told him he would continue treatment. She told him he would cooperate fully with Hilda. She told him that a real apology was something she would have to watch him build. Slowly, over years. Louisa walked over and slipped her hand into Callista's. "You don't have to be a no-house person anymore, do you?" she whispered. Callista's voice cracked, just slightly. "I think," she said, "I'm finding my way home." In the weeks that followed, the city's view of Callista did not change overnight. Some headlines were updated. Some apologies were issued. But years of damage do not unwind in a season, and the woman who had once stood on stages did not pretend otherwise. Enoch was offered his job back. The regional director apologized for the pressure he had folded under. Enoch accepted the position, but he was no longer the same kind of employee. He had learned that stability bought at the price of someone else's truth was not stability. It was a sturdier kind of cowardice. Louisa did not become a prodigy. She still struggled some afternoons. She still missed her mother in waves that came without warning. But she no longer treated books as enemies. She wrote her first short essay that winter, 3 handwritten pages about the woman who used to read to her at night. Her mother had taught her to love stories, and Miss Bennet had taught her not to be afraid of them. Enoch read the essay twice in his car in the school parking lot and then sat very still for a long time. Callista was offered the role of executive director of Bennet Reading House. She accepted only after the board agreed to her conditions. A full independent audit of every fund. Public annual financial reports. Restoration of the scholarship program. Free reading clinics in 3 branches of the public library system. The rehiring of Bernice Clark in a senior compliance role. A formal whistleblower protection policy. The board agreed. Callista did not return to take revenge. She returned to clean what had been dirtied. In her first speech back, she said only that the reading house had been founded so that no child would be left behind, but that the organization itself had left the truth behind. From now on, she said, they would have to be worthy of the children whose names they kept invoking. The relationship between Enoch and Callista did not move quickly. He did not treat her as a woman he had rescued. She did not treat him as a debt to be paid. They came toward each other carefully, the way 2 people who had each lost a person they loved would come toward each other. She honored the memory of his late wife. She never tried to take the place of Louisa's mother. That alone made Louisa trust her in a way no other woman had earned. A year later, Bennet Reading House held a community reading night in a freshly renovated branch library. There were children from 4 neighborhoods, parents in raincoats and fleece jackets, 3 retired teachers volunteering to read aloud, and 1 slightly nervous 7-year-old wearing her best blue sweater. Callista wore a simple cream dress, her dark hair loose, a small badge on her lapel that read Executive Director, Bennet Reading House. She did not give a long speech. She introduced the volunteers and stepped aside. When it was Louisa's turn, the little girl stood on a low wooden stool and read 3 paragraphs she had written herself. She read about a woman who once sat in the rain holding a soaked book, and a father who did not walk past her because his daughter was watching, and a daughter who learned years later that the world is shaped by the small moments when adults choose not to look away. The room was very quiet by the end. After the readings, Enoch handed Callista a small wooden box. She opened it carefully. Inside, instead of a ring, was a single brass key on a slim leather fob. He told her quietly that it was the key to a small private reading room he had funded at the back of the new branch. He had named the room after his late wife. "I didn't want a new life to erase the woman who used to read to my daughter," he said. "I wanted everyone I loved to help raise Louisa together." Callista did not answer right away. She closed the box, kept her hand over it for a long moment, and then leaned forward and pressed her forehead briefly against his shoulder. It was not a proposal. It was not a wedding. It was something quieter and, in a way, more honest. It was the moment 2 people stopped being a rescue story and became, for the first time, a chosen family. Outside the library, the rain had started again, soft and slow. Louisa caught up to them on the front steps and tugged her father's sleeve. "Daddy," she asked, "what would have happened if you hadn't stopped that night?" Enoch looked at Callista. "Then I would have missed the person," he said, who taught us how to read our own lives again. Callista took Louise's hand on one side. Enoch took her other hand. The three of them walked together under the same awning where, a year before, a woman had once been told to move along, and a little girl had once asked the only question that had mattered. The lamp in the small reading room was on inside the library behind them. It would stay on for anyone who needed to find their way home.